Hi, I'm Kathryn Lopez from the National Review Institute and National Review Magazine, and I'm so grateful to have Jonathan Silver from the Tikvah Fund, editor of Mosaic, and Andrew Doran, a fellow at the Philos Project and author and veteran, and the two of you, honestly, I'd talk about anything with, and so I'm really grateful that you're making the time. You're both very busy to have a conversation about what's going on in Israel. Last night, obviously, a big thing happened, and on we're talking on Friday afternoon, so Thursday night, Friday morning, and what I wanted to do is have a conversation about what should people of faith be thinking about this. Um, I think everyone's having the same experience right now, scrolling on X and getting doom scrolling to some extent, and obviously getting some out of context news and a cocktail knowledge of war. But what's the bigger context, Jonathan? Yeah, just to give the audience some context, the two of you, I just think are tremendous people, and I remember introducing a dear friend of ours, Andrew Walther, to Andrew Doran, who was a real hero for Christians who were persecuted, among other things. Died a few years ago, but there was this epic lunch at the old Ebbett Grill. I remember talking about everything under the sun. And Jonathan, my memory of you is this long conversation we had in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which was just a tremendous gift. So this is my little chance to try to bring some of those wonderful insights and conversations to readers from National Review. So with that, Jonathan, what are you thinking about what's going on in Israel and Iran right now?
Kathryn, it's so good to be with you. Andrew, it's good to see you. Um, Let me say a couple of things just to set the table. And I think that what I want to say is conveying an experience that I think many American Jews in particular will have had over the past period of time. You know, there has been, as it is so often said, a dramatic escalation in domestic terrorism and domestic incidents of anti-Semitism in the United States. And I think that that is part of what you will find your American Jewish neighbors experiencing when they consumed last night's news.
Mm-hmm.
Just to sort of set the table, I mean, this story goes back a very long way, but the most immediate chapters of the story, I think, can be traced to just this past April and during Passover, when the Jewish governor of Pennsylvania's residence was the subject of some arson attack. A month later, of course, there was the assassination of two Israeli embassy officials in Washington, D.C., followed soon after that by the Molotov cocktails and fire attack of the march in Boulder, Colorado. And I think that when American Jews are looking at that, they start to ask themselves questions about the place of the Jews in America and the place of Jews in the modern world. And you start to wonder, is there some kind of repetition or echo in history?
Mm.
And what you will have found in the Jewish media and in other places too are allusions to the years leading up to the Second World War. Now, the Jewish people themselves, in the way that we have presented our story, are sometimes are complicit in the way that that story is told. After all, there are a great many Americans who, when they want to visit Washington, D.C., and visit the Jewish place in Washington, the place that they're able to go is the Holocaust Museum in Washington, where you'll see Jews as victims. You'll see Jews who are weakened by their adversaries. You'll see piles of shoes and piles of shorn hair from Jewish ladies. You'll see all this, and you'll come away with an impression that's not unlike the impression that the Jews have of themselves, have been asking ourselves, are we victims? And with that background in mind, one then turns to the story of Israel, and you see something else entirely,
Mm.
a study in contrast. For whereas the Jews in Israel were certainly victims after the barbarous attacks of October 7th, think of what they have done since that time. the women and men of Israel's defense forces have done something which is not what victims do. They
Mm,
have taken responsibility and self-command as a self-governing people, responsible for their children and their ancestors and the future of, the future generations of Jews who are living there. And they said, we're not going to stand by and allow history to repeat itself. What we're going to do instead is proactively counter our most dangerous adversaries. And I think that what they have done last night, just thinking in the sweep of history, is remarkable. What they have done last night is just. What they have done last night, I believe, not only makes the world a little bit safer for my own kids here in the United States, it makes the world safer for Israelis. It makes the world safer for Israel's Arab neighbors. There's a very good chance that it could make the world safer for millions upon millions of Iranian children as well.
that would be amazing, wouldn't it? Andrew, there's an added element of this in Hezbollah not engaging thus far. You have a lot of experience in the State Department, and curious your insights on that.
Yeah, thanks, Kathryn, and it's great to be with you, and great to be with John. Great to see two old friends. Um, yeah, I did work on Lebanon. It was part of my portfolio in the policy planning office. I also worked at In Defense of Christians and nonprofit space there for several years. Got to know many people in Lebanon and Israel, both over the years. At a time when those two countries were not only not talking, there was no direct or indirect communication. The thought was that if a major war between Iran and Israel were to occur, that Lebanon would fire the first volley, fire 100,000 rockets uh, into Israel from southern Lebanon, and that Lebanon would be destroyed, and that this place, which has been a Christian bastion and the only place where Christians have any meaningful political representation in the region, where the president is a Christian, a Catholic, in fact, um, according to the Constitution, where the university system and the healthcare system for decades led the region. Um, that this would all be lost, that this would all be destroyed, and it was really not possible to even imagine um, any scenario in which there would be a conflict and Lebanon would not be completely destroyed. Whether you were talking to Lebanese, Israelis, American officials, analysts, or people who were being paid at the time to think outside the box on these kinds of issues. And I remember the Philos Project last spring did a novena, a 9-day novena for peace for Lebanon from and the title of it was from Mount Carmel to Mount Lebanon. I think the Our Lady of Mount Carmel and Saint Charbel, I think, were exactly 9 days apart, and so there was a novena. But I have to tell you, I was personally deeply skeptical that there was going to be anything like a hopeful outcome. And then, not long afterwards, the Israelis pulled off something that um, really defy anyone's imagination with the Beeper attack. And completely crippled Hezbollah in a single moment with their um, uh, with the operation that was pulled off against Hezbollah. And Hezbollah had joined the 10-7 war at Iran's behest, firing attacks, creating a second front after 10-7. And anyway, since then, that has created an environment in which a new president of Lebanon and uh, peace negotiations have paved the way for uh, the possibility of lasting peace. And now we have a scenario in which there is a war erupting and Hezbollah is not engaged and they are substantially diminished thanks to the IDF. And this is something that people who do advocacy or talk a lot about Christians in the Middle East, Tucker Carlson comes to mind because he wants to talk about this, has never raised this particular issue. And he's not alone. There are certainly a number of people on the right, including some Catholics, and it's very disappointing to hear them talk about this issue, really knowing nothing about it and not giving anything like a fair or balanced view. And it just has to be said that whatever one thinks of their motives, the prosecution of this war has not been anything like the way it's been presented. Um, and it is not like the popular understanding. The Israelis have gone to great lengths to minimize civilian casualties, often at the expense of Israeli life. And the perception is the opposite around the world. And that is an injustice. And it's difficult not to see that as just one of the many variants of manifest anti-Semitism in our midst today.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to ask, and Jonathan, obviously, I'm interested in your insights. There is not supporting Israel. Not supporting Israel isn't anti-Semitic in itself, but there's a lot of anti-Semitism behind some of the coverage, some of the criticisms. Obviously, the hostage situation and Gaza is such a complicated situation because of the way Hamas uses civilians. Um, but but tremendous credit needs to go to Israel for obviously, like we've been saying, this is a self-defense operation, but they have definitely thought through the moral implications for people in other countries here.
Kathryn, I would say that first of all, to answer your question, of course, criticism of Israel is not in and of itself anti-Semitic. If that were the case, then virtually every Israeli I know would be anti-Semitic. For everyone who thinks that there's, robust a culture of robust argument and debate, I promise you it is nowhere more robust than in democratic Israel. Um, but look, you make the fundamental moral point, which I think deserves underscoring here, which I would put like this. In this war, in the waging of this war in Gaza, Hamas has elaborated a new tactic that has, as far as I know, has never been deployed in the history of warfare, which is it has engineered its own fighters, and it has engineered the battlescape in such a way. See, in most wars, you want to harm the enemy. You want to harm the enemy's military personnel, and you might want to harm the enemy's civilians as a tactic to pressure your war goals. Hamas has designed the battlescape in such a way that their purpose is to harm their own civilians as a tactic in war. And that is a monstrous moral crime that women and men of faith should oppose, in a way where you began by saying the war in Gaza is complicated. That aspect of it is not complicated at all. That aspect of it, to me, is one of these decisions of moral clarity that I think separates women and men of faith from those who have more mendacious and duplicitous aspirations in mind. The way that Hamas has conducted this war is a tragedy for the Israelis, and it is no less a tragedy for the civilians of Gaza.
And yet you have this popular perception that Israel is starving people in Gaza, and that somehow Israel is this evil caricature, when the opposite is the case. And as you say, Israel does not act like a victim. It acts like actually a moral leader in some cases.
Look, you were kind enough to mention that one of the things that I'm responsible for at Tikvah is our magazine Mosaic. Mosaic has published tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of words of covering this war over the past 616 days. One of the first things that we published was something by Andrew, who made the case, I think, as eloquently as I have read anywhere, that what the Western world needs to watch what is happening in Israel, because Israel's adversaries will not stop with the Jews. I
Mm.
mean, Andrew, you can explain how you came to reason your way to that conclusion, but I think that I just want to quickly respond to Kathryn's point, which is that Israel is demonstrating what it will take all Western nations to summon the moral confidence to act in defense of its own people. Israel is showing something that I think that we in the United States and all Western nations have got to learn.
Andrew, can you expound on that, especially considering, as you mentioned, there are many conservatives who just want us to totally disengage at this point. But that's morally impossible, isn't it?
No, I don't know that I'm probably um, somewhat alone here, but I've said to people for the last several years, if there's an American who says my position is that I'm an isolationist, I say that's fine. You're an American, you're free. Probably that's a view that's it's rooted in some sort of experience. But I would say um, don't tell Israel that it may not defend itself, and don't pretend that um, those who hate Israel only hate Israel and they don't hate America. We're the big Satan, they're the little Satan. And it's going to be that way as long as there are Islamist terrorist ideologues in the world. They've gotten a lot of mileage out of that, not only in the Middle East, but now on our own campuses. This problem has come here, and that is very visible in all the domestic terrorism that we've seen. And
Well,
as John said,
it was horrific last night, as everybody who was doom scrolling like us saw. What were the immediate reactions in the United States to see local officials say that we're going to have police deployed to the synagogues, and which you have to do, but it's horrific that that's happening in the United States.
yeah, this that particular issue did begin years before 10/7 in 2023. We'd been trending this way. Pittsburgh is 2018. I remember I used to go hiking near Rock Creek, not far from the synagogue in Rockville, Maryland. And I think in 2017 or so, there was a police presence there that was something that was new. And this is the case, around the country. And it's deeply troubling as an American. You are not used to this. Um, but um,
This
yeah,
is very
John,
this is very true, Andrew. But let me just say, I think you're right to point to the Pittsburgh shooting in 2018. Of course, along the way, we've had Charlottesville, we've had Poway, we've had shooting in Texas. Meaning, this is unfortunately this trend goes back a ways. I would just say to the Jewish viewers of this program, the most powerful response to that is to be in synagogue on Saturday,
Mm.
is to actually go. And even for people for whom their own religious devotion is such that they might not otherwise have gone. This is one of those catalyzing moments when I think the right response is in fact a communal and religious response for us in the United States. And it leads me to this is going to seem very theological, but Kathryn, I was so grateful that you invited us to join this conversation because in a lot of the work that I do at Tikvah educationally, we think about strategy and politics and diplomacy and defense and security and but inviting Andrew and I here to think together with you as religious people, I do want to try to draw out a religious significance that I want to underscore, and maybe we can discuss for a minute, which is that there are different ways that you think that God might act in the world. And you might think that, miracles is one way that God acts in the world. And you might think that the structure of nature breaks and something very unexpected happens by God's hand. And I wouldn't deny that that happens in history from time to time. That does happen in history from time to time. Nevertheless, I think that there's a different way to see God's actions in the world. And those are when women and men try to ask themselves, what am I supposed to do? And then themselves take on some responsibility and act. And you might see God's presence emergent upon their actions in history. And I think that's no less a sign of God's presence here with us. And I have to say that there are so many millions of people in that region whose lives have been immiserated by the tyranny in Iran, Israelis among them, that the actions that Israel took last night against this monstrous, horrible regime that has repressed so many for so long. One doesn't want to say that this or that military action is an expression of God's will. That's not. I don't think that any human can say that. But you have to say you try to do what's right and hope that you're on God's side.
Mm,
And and I have to say that there is something providential about that could come out of this. And I don't want to, I don't, for people who are struggling to think theologically and think religiously about this moment in history, I want to put that on the table that God's actions are not only, miraculous in the way that we tend to think about that, splitting of the sea miraculous. Okay, it's also that there is a time when Israel's Air Force neutralized a nuclear threat that could have destroyed many, many thousands of lives.
mm,
And that's a good thing.
mm,
And that happened last night too.
mm. And
Yeah, I was just going to add that, you know, the another instance of the Israelis not getting enough credit. But I have to tell you, from my time in the region, the Israelis were the only ones who you hear Americans talking about two-state solutions. The Israelis are the only ones talking about that. Where is their partner? No
mm,
one wants peace more than the Israelis. No one would love to see a democratic, peaceful Iran than the Israelis and the most of the Iranian people, one presumes. Um, no one wants to see peace with Lebanon more than the Israelis, and this is something that's it is deeply overlooked much of the time, and it is very painful. But yeah, Kathryn, I cut you off. You were going to say something.
oh, no, no, no. I was just gonna ask from a Catholic perspective, Andrew, and I think it's kind of fascinating that we have an Augustinian Pope. And Augustine, of course, talked about just war theory. And sometimes when we pray for peace, we're praying for things like happened last night. Because you do need, yeah, as Jonathan was saying, you never ever ever want to be in the position where you're saying, God blesses this. But from a Catholic perspective, we're always supposed to be discerning what is God asking us to do, and that includes diplomatic measures. You hope that and you pray that people who are praying through what they're doing, and considering the moral implications. And one thing I wanted to ask you, Andrew, why don't Christians care about Lebanon and persecuted Christians? I know this is something that you've thought a lot about. Um, because this is,
And
as
Christians,
you
why
say,
don't they?
this could be a tremendous opportunity for our brothers and sisters in Christ from a Christian perspective. But that's not something talked about at all, really.
Yeah. Oh, for example, why would a very popular talk show host have um, a Palestinian pastor who hates Israel and represents a very small fraction of Christians in the Middle East, even probably a small fraction in the West Bank, on his show, instead of someone who would speak for the millions of Christians in Lebanon and Egypt? Uh, I'm speaking of Tucker Carlson, and I'm speaking of some of the guests he has on, I think, frankly, in bad faith. And he mischaracterizes that. So I think right off the bat, you have those who um, really bear some sort of moral obligation to share the truth with their listeners, who are obviating an entire majority of Christians in the region, just pushing them right off to the side for another purpose. What is that purpose? I don't. I could speculate about his motives there, but I don't know that that would really help. Why don't Christians know? I think we're very far removed geographically, culturally, historically from the
Sure.
Middle East. I think it feels very alien. Most American Christians, even Catholics, sadly think of our religion as being an essentially Western or European religion, when in fact it's from the Near East. Our roots are in Jerusalem and in the Holy Land and in Israel. So I think there are a lot of reasons. I think we're just very far removed from the region, and it's not really taught in a way that makes us feel any sort of connection to the Christians of the Near East. So it is a great opportunity. It's sad that it's lost, that it's missed so much of the time. It's interesting to me that no one talks about the fact, for example, that Christianity is growing in Israel. It's the only place where it's growing right now. It's shrinking everywhere else, and it's not just Christians from the Near East, from all over the world. The populations and the Christian people in Israel have religious freedom. It's protected. They are not second-class citizens. They don't have to worry about the locals blowing up their churches when they walk into church, as they do in Iraq or Egypt or Syria. So there's a lot that we in the public culture have failed to convey to other Americans about Israel, about Christians in the region. Um, yeah,
Why is Christianity growing there?
I think a number of different reasons. I think the first reason is that there's economic opportunity. I think the second is that they are not dhimmi. Christians in Israel actually have a higher earning per capita than Jewish Israelis, which is something that's not widely known. The Christians, their schools have been very successful. Now, this isn't true across the board. It's not true everywhere. In Galilee, for example, there is a Muslim, the region in the north is Muslim majority. I think it's only 45% Jewish, and that was once a Christian stronghold. But there again, the Christians are not leaving because of Jewish neighbors. So it is complicated, and I think it's worth. The first thing I would say is that Christians should go to the Holy Land. They should go to Israel, and if they do go, they shouldn't just hear one side. Talk to all sides, spend time there, and I think they will see, as I saw, that there is such a disparity between reality as it's reported and what you experience on the ground. I think just the idea that the IDF um, are some sort of callous monsters who are deliberately targeting civilians. John alluded to something earlier. I see it exactly the same way, and have pointed this out to people over the last couple of years. I don't think there's ever been a war like this where um, all the conditions exist that John pointed out, where you have one side whose mission is to get their enemy to kill their own people, to kill their own civilian population. That's how they measure victory. And we also have a Western press that is complicit in that. The European press, the Western press, much of the American media is incentivizing that. And when you think about how twisted that is, it means that not only are Palestinians dying, Israelis are dying, and hostages are not being returned. So 52 hostages from 10/7 remain missing. And I'm
You know,
sorry, not
you know, po-
missing, unaccounted
possibly,
for, but they're being held. Those who may be alive are being held in Gaza or God knows where.
yeah, I was going to say possibly with as many as 20, thought to be still alive.
Well, and just the other day there were two that we learned were dead, and it's like a sidebar news story. People don't even notice anymore. It's
Yeah.
abhorrent. Jonathan, there's so many things. Well, one of them you were talking about the IDF, Andrew, and one of the things you appreciate when you spend time in Israel is the IDF is the civilians. I was talking to when we went on that Philos trip together. We were all in Israel. We saw this. We went to this pregnancy center, Efrat, and I was talking to the executive director a couple of days ago or a couple of weeks ago, and his wife is has basically a ministry where she's getting together with the wives of IDF soldiers, and you realize in like every conversation, people's kids are serving in the IDF. This is, these are the civilians actually. um and the other thing which I say to people, and it sounds crazy, but I have never felt safer, more peaceful than at 4:30 in the morning in the old city Jerusalem, where the only people who are out besides security are people who want to pray. Christians, Jews, Muslims going to their respective places of worship, and it's an extraordinary experience that just gives you hope. Is my experience of it. But Jonathan, what is you talked about the proper Jewish response going to synagogue this weekend. What's the proper Christian response? Because I do think it's from your perspective. I remember after the October attacks, feeling kind of useless, among other things, but feeling like every obviously Jewish person I saw, wearing a kippah or something, I just wanted to say something. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I likewise, I kind of feel like today I want to say thank you. Even though the the Jewish man who's next to me on the Amtrak train didn't have anything to do with it necessarily, but in another sense, is that a proper thing to do?
Kathryn, I feel exactly the same way, and I join you in expressing my unbelievably profound thanks to the Christian, Druze, Muslim, and Jewish soldiers of the IDF
Hmm.
who have prosecuted this unbelievably bold, probably 20 years in the making, first wave of operations that I think could potentially be one of these pivot moments in the history of the region.
Hmm.
I I think that now look, history is messy and unpredictable, and any careful reader of the Bible will see just that. Um, so I don't know how this is all going to end up. Nobody does. But I will, but I do join you in offering unbelievable thanks, and I think that this is a moment of hope for people who care about peace. That this might be a new era. But let me just say something else too. Um, for those of our listeners and viewers who don't know this, you're absolutely right that Israelis serve in the military as a matter of national compulsory service. Um, there are some subpopulations of the Israeli population that do not serve, but they're a minority and an exception. By and large, and for the most part, Israelis serve in the military for several years at a certain age after high school. Okay. What we saw after October 7th in the rallying around the flag, very understandable desire to protect what has been exposed as vulnerable, led not 100% of the reservists, meaning people who are not no longer in compulsory military service, but who need to come back and volunteer after their compulsory military. Not 100% of them showed up. 120% of the Israeli population that needed to join the reserves showed up. People who were not called by their platoon, by their battalion, nevertheless got in their car and drove there and said, I'm here, put me to work.
Hmm.
Now, if you think that's impressive, which I certainly do, to me, what is even more impressive is the fact that now, some 616 days later, upwards of 70% of the civilian reservists continue to show up. What that means is that they're leaving their businesses, they're leaving their studies, they're leaving their families, they're leaving their daughter's baseball game, they're leaving the things that they otherwise would have done in their private lives because their country needs them.
Hmm.
So you're right. I think when you notice that walking around the streets of Jerusalem early in the morning, there are religious sites there. There are Christian sites and Muslim sites and Jewish sites which are protected by Israeli law enforcement. That is true. The fact that Israelis are nevertheless willing to serve the public good in this way is exactly what I think we in America need to look to and say, look, if we're going to have an integral civilization, if we're going to be able to sustain our way of life, just as the Israelis are working so hard to sustain their way of life, we have to be inspired by that example. And I think that's something that women and men of faith in America, Jewish and not Jewish, can learn. In this way, Israel is making itself into from my perspective, a moral exemplar we can learn from.
Mm. And I would argue, and Andrew, I want you to respond to that. It's not just a military response; it's a civil society response as well, which you see vividly in Israel as well. Andrew, there are people you talked about, people of ill will, who oppose Israel. But there's also an understandable in the United States nervousness about when something like this happens, are we going to get involved? Are there going to be American troops? And how would you caution people to think about that? Or
Yeah, I here I part ways with um, some conservative friends who are of a decidedly non-interventionist bent, and people I otherwise, well, people I do respect, but I think they're missing something key. This is not 2002, 2003 mobilization to invade Iraq again. Whatever one may think about that, this is not that. And we know that this is not that, and that there hasn't been anything like that. So I think it's very disingenuous for conservatives to say, "Well, here we go. It's it's regime change all over again." This is nothing like that, and it wasn't in the first Trump administration either. So I think that's deeply troubling because that's never been on the table. If it were, you would be hearing. It would be congressional hearings, leaks, daily leaks from the Pentagon. There would be stories about it. Nothing like that's happening. Now, would there be naval and air support? Is that going to be part of a what's essentially a defensive operation? Yes, but enough with the very lazy analysis. I think that's not really helpful. We benefit from the partnership with Israel. That might not have been true in 1948, but today it's very true. Israel is leading not just in military technology that would give us greater defense of our own homeland in a number of fields. The Israelis are cutting edge in a number of areas, and it could be medical technology, military technology. Um, um, yeah, I just think it's worth pointing out that. And this is what I was going to say a moment ago. This is what I found interesting long before 10/7 in Israel. It was so much more. What I saw in Israel was the society that Christians I had heard all of my adult life, all of my life really, say this was the society they wanted of faith, family, and culture. And the Israelis were living it. And I would talk to people who'd never been to Israel who had some sort of like, I don't know, 1980 or 85, understanding of something they had read about Israel being very secular, or maybe they just, made all these presumptions. Israel is very religious, it's very traditional. I think you could really look at Israel in many ways as being the first Western post-sexual revolution society that we've seen.
hmm.
They're very traditional in their dating. I remember, John, we were together and we were in a hotel and you looked over and said, I told my sister about this. She was laughing hysterically. And you see all these very pure, innocent, lovely young people on dates and they go to a public place with monitors and they sit there and they talk and they've created their own apps because they don't like the American apps, the Western apps. It's an absolutely lovely society. You mentioned civil society, Kathryn. I was in Israel on 10/7 and watching that place come together, watching the people come together and rally and volunteer. It reminded me of things I had heard about America in its better days. And it was just, it gave me so much hope. I spent time there. I spent a lot of time there over a period of about 2 or 3 years for just that reason, because you could sense that something special was happening, and the war has not changed that. I have had occasion to talk to some of these young kids, and they are filled with trauma because they've seen a lot, and they're very young, and it's tragic. And but I don't worry for Israel in the least. I worry for Europe. I'm very worried about Europe. I have a lot of concerns about the United States. I think we have a lot of things we have to work through. Not worried about Israel.
Hmm.
And I say that as someone who really came to love Israel from my time there. Not worried about them. They don't have the they don't have any crisis of faith or demography, and the West faces those things. Excuse me.
Do you think in Israel's case it's because they were forced to? Is it a
I,
perpetual
I don't.
existential threat? You know?
Yeah, I mean, they don't have the time for luxury values, as a lot of people have pointed out. When you have several million people who are motivated to kill you, that will focus your attention away from things. And frankly, the Israelis I talked to over the last few years had a very, they were deeply concerned about what they saw, the trends that they saw in our public culture,
Mm.
the extreme ideology, the attacks on the family, things that I think again would really surprise a lot of Westerners, and they're not quick to say that they don't want to lead with criticisms of America. We're two very friendly countries, but very friendly peoples. But they were deeply troubled by things that they saw from wokeism to Antifa in the streets to extremist ideologies on campus. They were deeply aware of these things. So, um, yeah. Yeah. You asked me, by the way, Kathryn, I didn't finish, I'm sorry, about Augustine, St. Augustine just war and having an Augustinian Pope. And we seem to have lucked out so far. Everything seems great. Nice to have, as PG Woodhouse would say, reason was back on her throne. Um, the Before we get into just war, just for a second, um, the first instance I'm aware of something like justice being introduced into any sort of context like this is the idea of proportionality, which comes from an eye for an eye. John, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's not a lot of instances in ancient pagan antiquity where you have a single people who are saying, treat the other with dignity, treat the other with justice. So, yes,
No,
there are
this
universal
this is
claims.
this is this is really important. Just to underscore, Andrew, I don't want to. You'll fill out the sketch in a moment, but just to
Please.
underscore, what that means in context. See, when we hear that phrase "eye for an eye," now we think of how cruel and crude it is. But I think that it takes seriously that spirit for vengeance and anger and darkness that every person has inborn in them. And when you are wronged, you don't want to take out a tooth, you want to punch out the whole row of teeth. You want to extract vengeance. And it is a restraint on that natural human impulse. I think that's the way to understand that biblical injunction.
Yeah. And I see just war as an extension of that, as something that flows from Hebrew scripture and Hebrew tradition. And that idea of proportionality is embedded, I think, in just war theory. I don't think we need to, I don't want to start a sidebar about just war theory. I think I would say, however, that um, it became suddenly in vogue to talk about after 10/7, you know. And I think that that's something that merits stopping and asking ourselves. Why is it that um, why is it that we in the West are suddenly, and Christians in the West are suddenly interested in talking about this only when uh, Israel is defending itself? I think it's worth asking. You don't hear it coming up in a lot of other contexts, and there's war going on all over the world. Yeah, just something to think about.
Well, we could talk for hours, but one of the things that's beautiful about Israel is that they shut down on Friday evenings. And Jonathan, I have to let you do that.
Thank you.
And there is something just so resetting about that. And so thank you for the example that you set. Jonathan Silver, Andrew Doran, thank you for your time. Tikvah Fund, Philos Project. And I hope we can continue to be having conversations like this and pray for wisdom and wisdom not only just for the people who are making these extraordinary historic decisions, but for all of us in our commentary and our interactions. And thank you, Jonathan, for the work that you do and who you are, and Andrew likewise. And yeah, please keep coming to National Review for conversations like this and obviously commentary and news.
Andrew, so good to see you. Kathryn, thank you.
Shabbat.
Great to see you, John. Great to see you, Kathryn. Shabbat
Right.
shalom. Okay.
Bye.
Bye, Kathryn.